At 34 years old, his bank balance showed a number he was afraid to look at. Credit cards were maxed out. Student loans hadn't moved in years. Bills arrived faster than his paycheck. Every notification on his phone triggered anxiety. From the outside, his life looked normal. He went to work every morning, smiled at coworkers, and answered "I'm good" whenever someone asked how things were going. But every night, when the lights were off and the room was quiet, the same thought kept repeating in his mind. How did I let it get this bad? 2 years earlier, his debt wasn't the result of one big mistake. It was hundreds of small ones. Eating out because cooking felt exhausting. Using credit cards to buy time. Ignoring statements because facing them felt worse than pretending they didn't exist. Every month, he told himself he would start fixing things next month. Next month never came. The debt grew silently, like a slow leak filling a room while he stood inside, pretending the floor wasn't getting wet. The breaking point didn't come with drama. No phone call. No eviction notice. It happened on a random Tuesday evening when he sat at his kitchen table, opened his laptop, and finally added up everything he owed. The total was higher than he expected. Much higher. For a few minutes, he just stared at the screen. His chest felt tight. His first instinct was to close the laptop and walk away. That's what he'd always done. But this time, something felt different. Walking away suddenly felt more painful than staying. That night, he didn't create a perfect plan. He didn't watch motivational videos or promise himself a new life. He did one small thing. He wrote the number down on a piece of paper. Just the total debt. No excuses. No explanations. He folded the paper and put it in his wallet. Not to shame himself, but to make the problem real. For the first time, the debt wasn't an abstract fear. It was something concrete. Something he could face. The next weeks were uncomfortable. He cancelled subscriptions he barely remembered signing up for. He started bringing lunch to work, even though it felt embarrassing at first. He stopped pretending small purchases didn't matter. Every dollar suddenly had weight. Progress was painfully slow. Some months, it felt like nothing changed at all. The balance went down a little, then up again after an unexpected expense. There were days he felt foolish for even trying. What surprised him most wasn't the math. It was the emotional toll. Debt wasn't just numbers. It affected how he slept, how he spoke, how he thought about himself. He avoided social events because spending money felt dangerous. He felt behind in life, watching others move forward while he stayed stuck. Some nights, he questioned whether stability was even possible for someone like him. Not because he lacked intelligence or effort, but because he'd spent so long reacting instead of choosing. About 6 months in, something subtle changed. The debt was still there, but the panic wasn't as loud. He knew where every dollar was going. He had a system, even if it wasn't perfect. When unexpected expenses showed up, they didn't destroy him emotionally. They slowed him down, but they didn't stop him. For the first time in years, he felt a small sense of control. That feeling mattered more than the numbers. He started using time differently too. Instead of scrolling endlessly at night, he looked for ways to earn a little extra. Nothing dramatic. A few freelance tasks, a weekend gig. It wasn't glamorous, and it didn't double his income overnight. But every extra payment toward his debt felt like reclaiming a piece of his future. The progress was still slow, but now it was visible. There were setbacks. A car repair wiped out months of effort. A medical bill arrived without warning. Each time, frustration threatened to pull him back into old habits. The urge to give up was real, but something inside him had shifted. He wasn't chasing perfection anymore. He was chasing consistency. Even when progress paused, he didn't stop. That alone made all the difference. By the end of the first year, the number in his wallet was smaller, still intimidating, but no longer impossible. More importantly, his mindset had changed. He stopped seeing money as something that happened to him and started seeing it as something he could direct, even imperfectly. He learned to delay comfort without feeling deprived. He learned that stability isn't about having more, it's about needing less. Year 2 felt different. Momentum had built quietly. Payments made a visible dent now. The balance dropped faster. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine a future without constant financial pressure. That image kept him going when motivation disappeared, because motivation always disappears. Systems remain. Near the end of the second year, he logged into his account and saw something he hadn't seen in a long time. Zero at the moment didn't feel explosive or dramatic. It felt calm, almost unreal. He didn't celebrate immediately. He just sat there, breathing, letting the quiet sink in. The debt that once controlled his thoughts no longer had power over him. Stability didn't mean luxury. It didn't mean sudden wealth. It meant peace. It meant sleeping without anxiety. It meant choices. The biggest lesson he learned wasn't about budgeting or discipline. It was about honesty. Everything changed when he stopped avoiding reality and started meeting it directly, even when it hurt. 2 years earlier, he thought stability was something reserved for people who made fewer mistakes. Now he knows the truth. Stability is built by people who decide to stay, even when running feels easier. And that decision, repeated quietly over time, is what changed his life. After the debt was gone, he expected life to feel completely different. Like a switch had been flipped, and everything would suddenly be easy. But reality was quieter than that. The mornings still came early. Work was still work. Problems still showed up. What changed wasn't the world around him, it was the constant pressure inside his head. The background noise of stress that had followed him for years was gone, and in its place was clarity. For the first time, he wasn't reacting to money problems. He was planning. He built a small emergency fund, not because a financial expert told him to, but because he finally understood what peace of mind felt like. Even a few $1,000s set aside made him walk differently, speak differently, think differently. When something unexpected happened, it no longer felt like the end of the road. It felt like a detour. He noticed something else too. The discipline he built while paying off debt quietly spilled into other parts of his life. He became more patient, more intentional. He stopped chasing quick fixes and shortcuts. He learned how powerful, boring consistency really is. Not the kind that looks impressive online, but the kind that slowly reshapes a life behind the scenes. People around him didn't notice a dramatic change. There was no flashy upgrade, no sudden lifestyle shift. But he noticed how he could sit in silence without panic, how checking his bank account no longer made his stomach drop, how decisions were made from logic instead of fear. Stability wasn't loud, it was steady. Looking back, he realized the hardest part was never the payments or the sacrifices. The hardest part was facing the truth early on, admitting that the situation was real and that no one was coming to fix it for him. Once he did that, the rest became a series of manageable steps. Not easy, but possible. He also realized how many people around him were quietly struggling the same way he once did, smiling on the outside, drowning silently on the inside. Debt doesn't always look like failure. Sometimes it looks like normal life stretched just a little too thin, and that's what makes it dangerous. It convinces you that things are fine right up until they aren't. If there was one thing he wished he could tell his past self, it would be this: you don't need confidence to start, and you don't need motivation to continue. You need honesty and a willingness to stay when discomfort shows up. Progress doesn't require perfection, it requires presence. Cliff's 2 years didn't turn him into a different person. They revealed who he'd been capable of becoming all along. Someone who could face reality, make hard choices, and keep going without applause. Someone who learned that stability isn't about how much you earn, but how intentionally you live. And maybe the most important lesson of all was this: getting out of debt didn't just give him financial freedom. It gave him proof that change doesn't happen in one big moment. It happens quietly, one decision at a time. Until one day you look back and realize the life you once feared losing is finally yours to keep. Even now, long after the numbers stopped defining his days, he still carries one habit with him. Every few months, he sits down quietly and reviews where he is. Not out of fear, and not out of obsession, but out of respect for the journey it took to get here. He remembers how easy it is to drift when things feel comfortable, how quickly old patterns can return if awareness fades. Stability taught him that maintenance matters just as much as change. He no longer sees money as a measure of his worth. That belief took time to unlearn. For years, debt made him feel smaller, less capable, behind. Paying it off didn't magically erase those thoughts, but it weakened them. Slowly, he replaced shame with understanding. He wasn't irresponsible. He was unprepared. And preparation, unlike the past, is something you can build. Some people assume stories like his are about extreme sacrifice, that he gave up everything enjoyable and lived in constant misery for 2 years. That wasn't true. He still lived. He still laughed. He just learned how to enjoy things without borrowing from his future. He learned that contentment doesn't come from spending more, but from wanting less than you earn. That realization alone changed how he viewed success. When others ask him how he did it, he rarely talks about spreadsheets or strategies. He talks about staying with discomfort, staying with the truth, staying even when progress felt invisible. Because the real danger isn't slow progress, it's quitting during the quiet phase when nothing seems to be happening. That's where most people stop. That's where he didn't. He understands now why so many people feel stuck. Debt doesn't just limit your finances, it limits your imagination. It makes the future feel closed off, like something you're not allowed to think about. Stability reopened that door, not with promises of wealth, but with permission to breathe and plan again. And maybe that's what makes this story ordinary and powerful at the same time. There was no shortcut, no secret trick, no overnight transformation. Just a person who decided to face reality one day and refused to look away after that. 2 years of small, unglamorous choices built a life that finally felt steady. If someone listening to this story is standing where he once stood, feeling overwhelmed and quietly ashamed, there's one thing worth remembering. The moment you stop avoiding the truth, the future starts moving again. Slowly at first, almost invisibly, but it moves. And one day, without fireworks or applause, you'll look back and realize that stability didn't arrive all at once. It grew, patiently, while you kept going. And in the quiet moments, when he reflects on those 2 years, he no longer measures them by how much debt disappeared, but by who he became while it was happening. He became someone who learned to pause before reacting. Someone who learned that discomfort isn't a signal to escape, but a signal to pay attention. Someone who realized that facing reality doesn't break you, avoiding it does. Stability didn't make him fearless, it made him grounded. Problems still appear, but they no longer feel like threats to his identity. They are just situations to handle, one step at a time. That understanding alone is worth more than any number in a bank account. If this story feels familiar, it's because it isn't rare. Millions of people live inside this quiet struggle, believing their situation defines their future. But the truth is simpler and harder at the same time. Change doesn't begin with confidence. It begins with honesty, with staying present long enough to take the next small step, even when it feels insignificant. 2 years can pass whether you face reality or avoid it. The difference is what you carry with you when they're over. He chose to carry awareness, discipline, and peace. And that choice made quietly, repeated daily, is what turned debt into stability and survival into a life that finally feels his own.